The crystalline spires of Vega Prime crumbled like sugar castles in the rain. Admiral Zara Kextel watched through the reinforced viewport of her command dreadnought as the jewel of the My Galactic Empire burned beneath waves of crimson plasma fire. 27,000 years of civilization, reduced to ash and screaming metal in a matter of hours. Admiral, her aide whispered, his blue-scaled hands trembling as he clutched a data tablet. The Ninth Fleet reports total losses. The Deathworlders have broken through the Centauri line. Zara's 4 eyes never left the dying planet below. Her species, the Kalari, had evolved on peaceful garden worlds where the greatest threat was seasonal pollen storms. Like most of the Empire's founding races, they had grown soft over millennia of prosperity. The irony wasn't lost on her that their downfall came from the very worlds they had dismissed as uninhabitable hellscapes. "How many ships do we have left?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. 47 vessels across all classes, ma'am. Perhaps 300,000 personnel. From a force of over 10 million warships and a quadrillion citizens spread across 50,000 worlds, they were now reduced to the contents of a single fleet. The mathematics of extinction were surprisingly simple. The Deathworlders had emerged from the galactic rim 18 months ago, their ships like nothing the Empire had ever encountered. Where my galactic vessels were elegant curves of living metal and force fields, the enemy craft were angular brutalities of raw armor plating and kinetic weapons. Their very appearance spoke of worlds where beauty was weakness and only the practical survived. "Ma'am, incoming transmission from the surface," her communications officer reported. It's Premier Hallandar." The Premier materialized as a flickering hologram, his usually immaculate silver robes now torn and blood-stained. Behind him, the sounds of battle raged, the distinctive crack of Deathworlder slug-throwers punctuated by the dying whines of plasma weapons. "Admiral," he gasped, "the capital has fallen. The Deathworlders have taken the Senate chambers. They're executing the council members. Broadcasting it across the galaxy." Zara felt something cold settle in her stomach. The Deathworlders weren't just conquering, they were making an example. 27 millennia of accumulated knowledge, art, and culture were being systematically destroyed to send a message: the age of the soft races was over. "What are your orders, Premier?" Hallandar looked directly at her, and in his eyes she saw the weight of a dying civilization. "Activate the Exodus Protocol. Save what you can, Admiral. The Empire is dead, but perhaps something can survive." The transmission cut to static as a massive explosion bloomed across the planet's surface. Vega Prime, the administrative heart of a galaxy-spanning empire, had become a funeral pyre. 3 years had passed since the fall, though time moved differently in the void between galaxies. Admiral Zara Kextel, now simply called Commander by the 40,000 survivors under her protection, stood in the observation deck of the repurposed freighter Lasting Hope. This ship had once carried luxury goods between the core worlds. Now it housed refugee families in cargo bays converted to cramped living quarters. "Commander," came a voice behind her. She turned to see Dr. Marcus Webb, one of the few humans who had served in the Imperial military before the Deathworlders revealed themselves. His species had been something of an oddity in the Empire. Originating from what was classified as a mild death world, they possessed an unusual combination of empathy and resilience that made them excellent diplomats and medics. "Dr. Webb, how are our people holding up?" The human's weathered face creased with concern. "As well as can be expected. The Thylorian children are struggling with the artificial gravity fluctuations, and we're running low on the specific nutrients the Zephyrian elders need. But we're alive." It was a familiar refrain. They were alive, which was more than could be said for the trillions they'd left behind. The Exodus fleet, as the survivors had taken to calling themselves, consisted of 47 ships carrying representatives from dozens of species. They were the last free citizens of the My Galactic Empire, condemned to wander the cosmic void while their former worlds burned. "There's something else," Webb continued. "We've been receiving transmissions from the occupied territories. Some of them are difficult to process." Zara's primary eyes focused on him, while her secondary pair continued monitoring the star charts. "Show me." They made their way to the communications center, a cramped space that had once been a wine cellar. The chief communications officer, a six-limbed Arcturian named Velko, gestured to the main screen with two of his arms while operating controls with the other four. "This came in 6 hours ago," Velko said. "It's being broadcast on all Imperial frequencies." The screen flickered to life, showing a figure that made Zara's blood run cold. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body a mass of corded muscle covered in what appeared to be natural armor plating. Its face was a nightmare of predatory features, forward-facing eyes that glowed with an inner fire, a jaw that could crush bone, and a mane of what might have been hair but moved like living tentacles. When it spoke, its voice was like grinding stone. "I am War Leader Krothvex of the Thanatos Collective. Hear me, survivors of the Galactic Empire." The camera pulled back to reveal the creature standing in what had once been the Grand Assembly Hall on Vega Prime. The beautiful murals depicting the unity of species had been defaced with crude symbols that hurt to look at directly. Suspended from the ceiling were the mummified corpses of the Empire's last senators, their bodies preserved as trophies. "For 27,000 years, your empire sprawled across the galaxy like a cancer, spreading weakness and complacency. You took the strong worlds and made them soft. You convinced the warrior races to lay down their arms in the name of peace and prosperity." Krothvex gestured to the hanging corpses. "This is the fate of all who choose the path of pacifism. We are the children of worlds that you deemed uninhabitable. Worlds where only the strong survive, where every day is a battle against extinction itself. You called us primitive, savage, unfit for your precious galactic community." The war leader's eyes seemed to bore through the screen. "But we learned. We washed. We grew strong while you grew weak. And now we have come to cleanse the galaxy of your corruption." The transmission shifted to show scenes from across the former empire. Burning cities, refugee columns being herded into camps, vast shipyards being converted to produce the angular warships of the Deathwielders. It was systematic, efficient, and utterly ruthless. "To any who fled into the void," Krothvex continued, "know that there is no sanctuary. We have tasted the poison of your civilization, and we will not rest until every trace of it is purged. Return to surrender, and we will grant you a swift death. Continue to run, and we will hunt you across the stars until the universe grows cold." The transmission ended, leaving the communications center in stunned silence. "How many other survivor groups are out there?" Zara asked quietly. "We've identified 17 other fleets," Velko replied, "ranging from a few dozen ships to several hundred. Perhaps 500,000 souls in total, scattered across the galactic rim. 500,000 survivors from a civilization that had once numbered in the quadrillions." The scale of the genocide was almost incomprehensible. Dr. Webb placed a gentle hand on Zara's shoulder. "There's more. We've been analyzing the Deathworlder technology and tactics. They're not just conquering randomly, there's a pattern. They're specifically targeting the worlds with the highest concentrations of what they call soft evolution species. The garden worlds, the ocean worlds, the peaceful civilizations. They're trying to reshape the galaxy," Zara realized. "Create an environment where only their kind of life can thrive." "Precisely. And they're succeeding. Our intelligence reports suggest they've already eliminated or enslaved over 60% of the Empire's former population. The remaining worlds are either under siege or have submitted to avoid destruction." Zara stared at the star charts on the wall, showing the positions of their pathetic little fleet in the vast emptiness between galaxies. They were running out of supplies, running out of hope, and running out of time. The Deathworlders were right about one thing: there was nowhere to hide forever. "Commander," Velko spoke up hesitantly, "there's one more thing. We've been receiving coded transmissions from someone calling themselves the Phoenix Coalition. They claim to be organizing resistance groups in the former Empire." "Another survivor fleet?" "No, ma'am. These appear to be resistance cells operating in occupied territory. And they're calling for all refugee fleets to rendezvous at specific coordinates." Zara felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in 3 years: hope. Perhaps they weren't as alone as they thought. The rendezvous point was a dead system on the outer rim, where a dying red dwarf cast feeble light on the corpses of 7 frozen worlds. It was exactly the kind of place the Deathworlders would consider worthless, which made it perfect for a clandestine meeting. As the lasting hope dropped out of hyperspace, Zara was amazed to see nearly 300 ships already assembled in the shadow of the system's largest planet. Vessels from dozens of survivor fleets, representing almost every species that had once called the Empire home. She recognized Thylorian research vessels, Arcturian trading ships, even a few surviving Kalari warships that had somehow escaped the initial onslaught. "This is the most beautiful sight I've seen in 3 years," Dr. Webb muttered as he joined her on the observation deck. Their escort of 5 patrol craft guided them to a designated position near the center of the formation. As they approached, Zara could see the flagship of this impromptu armada, a massive Drakmari battlecruiser that had clearly seen better days. Its hull was scarred with battle damage and makeshift repairs, but it still flew the silver and blue banner of the Empire. "Incoming transmission from the flagship Vengeance Sworn," Velko announced. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing a figure that made Zara's heart skip a beat. General Thane Ravencrest had been one of the Empire's most decorated military commanders before the fall, a human whose strategic brilliance had ended 3 separate border conflicts without a shot being fired. She had assumed he died with the rest of High Command on Vega Prime. "Admiral Kextel," Ravencrest said with a slight smile. "Or should I say, Commander? I was beginning to wonder if we'd lost you entirely. General Ravencrest. I thought you were dead." "Dead? No, just extremely angry." The human's expression hardened. "We need to talk. All of us. Can you transfer to the Vengeance Sworn for a full briefing?" An hour later, Zara found herself in the battlecruiser's war room, surrounded by the largest gathering of Imperial leadership since the fall. The faces around the table represented dozens of species and hundreds of worlds, but they all shared the same haunted expression of survivors who had seen too much. General Ravencrest stood at the head of the table, his uniform bearing the insignia of the Phoenix Coalition, a stylized bird rising from flames, crafted from the melted remains of Imperial metals. "Before we begin, let's establish what we're dealing with. Intelligence reports?" A Zephyrian colonel activated a holographic display showing the galaxy. What had once been a tapestry of blue dots representing Imperial worlds was now predominantly red, with scattered yellow markers indicating contested systems. "As of last week, the Deathworlders control approximately 73% of former Imperial territory," the colonel reported in her species' characteristic whisper voice. "They've established what they call adaptation zones on captured worlds, essentially concentration camps where survivors are forced to undergo genetic and cybernetic modifications to make them more suitable for the Deathworlder way of life." "What about resistance movements?" asked Captain Velmore, a Kalari officer whose ship had escaped the destruction of the Rigel fleet. "More successful than we initially hoped," Ravencrest replied. "It turns out the Deathworlders made a critical error in their planning. They assumed that soft species were inherently weak and would simply accept their fate. They didn't account for the fact that even the most peaceful civilizations will fight when backed into a corner." The display shifted to show a network of green dots spreading across the occupied territories. "We currently have confirmed contact with over 400 resistance cells, ranging from small sabotage groups to entire planetary underground movements. They're calling themselves the Ember Guard, the scattered sparks of the Empire's flame." Dr. Webb leaned forward. "What kind of support are we talking about? A few thousand partisans aren't going to liberate entire star systems." "You'd be surprised," said a new voice. Everyone turned as a figure stepped out of the shadows at the edge of the room, a species Zara didn't immediately recognize. The being was humanoid but clearly adapted for a high-gravity world, with dense bone structure and muscle mass. Its skin had a metallic sheen, and its eyes were the color of molten gold. "This is Commander Steelclaw of the Nexari Hegemony," Ravencrest said. "His people were among the first to encounter the Deathworlders, 5 years before they revealed themselves to the Empire." Steelclaw stepped into the light, and Zara noticed the extensive scarring across his visible skin. The Nexary home system borders the galactic rim. We've been fighting the Thanatos Collective for over a decade. What you call Deathworlders are actually a coalition of over 200 species from the galaxy's most hostile environments. 200 species? Zara felt her hopes sinking. We're outnumbered on every level. Numbers aren't everything, Steelclaw continued. The Deathworlders' greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They despise anything that doesn't conform to their survival of the strongest philosophy. That includes most of their own client species. We've identified at least 50 member races that are essentially slaves, forced to serve through fear rather than loyalty. The holographic display changed again, showing detailed schematics of Deathworlder ships and weapons. My people have been studying their technology for years. Their ships are crude but effective, built for durability rather than efficiency. Their weapons are powerful but energy-intensive. And most importantly, their command structure is based on constant internal competition. Meaning what? Dr. Webb asked. Meaning they're not as unified as they appear. War leader Krothvax controls the Thanatos Collective through fear and force, but there are rival factions within their coalition. The Chromaxi Death Clans have territorial disputes with the Vorthan Reapers. The Silicon Crushers consider most other Deathworlder species to be barely evolved. If we can exploit those divisions, we might have a chance, Ravencrest finished. But it will require something that goes against every instinct we've developed over the past 3 years. We have to stop running and start fighting back. The room fell silent. For the survivors around the table, the idea of taking offensive action against their tormentors was both terrifying and exhilarating. What are you proposing? Zara asked finally. Operation Phoenix, Ravencrest replied. A coordinated campaign to transform our refugee fleets into a proper military force, link up with resistance movements in occupied territory, and begin systematic attacks on Deathworlder positions. We're not trying to reconquer the Empire, that civilization is dead. But we can create something new from its ashes. A phoenix that rises from the flames. The logistics alone would be staggering, protested Admiral Seoarthex, a veteran Drachmarie commander. We have mostly civilian ships, limited weapons, and no industrial base. How do we transform fishermen and merchants into soldiers? We adapt, said Steelclaw. The same way every species in this room survived the initial onslaught. The Deathworlders aren't wrong about evolution, the strong do survive. They're just wrong about what makes one strong. Ravencrest nodded. Intelligence, cooperation, technological innovation, strategic thinking, these are all forms of strength that don't require claws and armor plating. We're going to use our soft civilization advantages against opponents who have forgotten that wars are won by brains, not just brawn. And if we fail? Dr. Webb asked quietly. Then we'll have died fighting instead of slowly starving in exile, Ravencrest replied. Personally, I prefer that option. Zara looked around the table at the faces of the last free leaders of the My Galactic Empire. 3 years ago, they had been administrators, diplomats, scientists, and peacekeepers. Now they were being asked to become something their civilization had spent millennia trying to evolve beyond, warriors. But perhaps that evolution had been a mistake. Perhaps they had grown so focused on the peaceful coexistence of species that they had forgotten how to defend that peace when it was threatened. I'm in, she said finally. My ships and my people are with the Phoenix Coalition. One by one, the other commanders voiced their agreement. By the end of the meeting, they had committed nearly every survivor fleet to the most desperate military campaign in galactic history. As the gathering broke up and the commanders returned to their ships, Zara found herself walking alongside General Ravencrest toward the docking bay. General, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you really believe we can win? Or are we just choosing a more dramatic way to die? Ravencrest paused at the airlock leading to her shuttle. 3 years ago, I would have said we had no chance. The Empire's military was designed for peacekeeping and border disputes, not total war against an enemy that views peace itself as weakness. But you know what I've learned from the Resistance reports? What? The Deathworlders made one critical miscalculation. They assumed that survival instinct was the only force that could make soft species fight effectively. They never considered that love might be stronger than fear, love for our families, our cultures, our hope for a better future. That's a power they don't understand and can't replicate. As Zara's shuttle departed for the lasting hope, she found herself thinking about the 40,000 souls under her protection. Most of them were civilians, teachers, artists, engineers, farmers. They had never asked to become soldiers. But perhaps they were about to discover strengths they never knew they possessed. The Phoenix Coalition was about to rise from the ashes of the Galactic Empire. Whether it would soar or crash and burn remained to be seen. 6 months after the formation of the Phoenix Coalition, the refugee fleets had been transformed beyond recognition. Gone were the desperate civilian vessels running on empty fuel tanks. In their place was a lean, efficient military organization that would have been unrecognizable to Imperial commanders from the old days. Zara stood in the newly constructed command center of Phoenix Base, a massive space station assembled from the combined hulks of damaged warships and civilian vessels. The engineering feat had taken 4 months and represented everything the Coalition stood for, taking broken pieces of the past and forging them into something new and stronger. "Status report," she requested as she entered the tactical center. "Good morning, Admiral," replied Captain Sarah Chin, a human officer who had been promoted rapidly through the Coalition ranks due to her innovative tactical thinking. The Empire's old promotion system, which could take decades to advance from lieutenant to captain, had been abandoned in favor of a merit-based structure that rewarded results over tenure. "The 3rd Reconnaissance Wing has completed their survey of the Kepler sector," Chen reported. 12 systems under Deathworlder control, but intelligence indicates minimal defenses. They're focusing their military assets on the core worlds and assuming the rim territories are too insignificant to threaten. "Their mistake," Zara said with satisfaction. "What about recruiting?" "Better than expected. Word of our successes is spreading through the resistance networks. We've had over 6,000 volunteers join us in the past month, including 3 entire merchant fleets that decided to abandon their neutral status." The Coalition's recruiting strategy had been another break from Imperial tradition. Instead of formal military academies and long training programs, they had developed an intensive 6-week course that combined basic combat skills with specialized training based on each recruit's background. Former engineers became demolitions experts, merchant pilots learned to fly attack fighters, and even artists found their skills useful in psychological warfare campaigns. "Admiral," came another voice from across the room. "You need to see this." Lieutenant Velko, the former communications officer from the Lasting Hope who had been promoted to intelligence chief, gestured to a holographic display showing intercepts from Deathworlder transmissions. "We've been monitoring their internal communications, and there's definitely friction within their coalition. 3 separate war leaders have filed formal challenges against Krothvex's authority in the past week. What's causing the tension? Our raids, mostly. The attacks on their supply convoys and outposts are having the exact effect Commander Steelclaw predicted. The Deathworlder leaders are starting to blame each other for the security failures. Over the past 4 months, the Coalition had conducted 17 successful operations against Deathworlder targets. Nothing dramatic, mostly hit-and-run attacks on isolated outposts and supply depots, but each victory had been carefully chosen to maximize psychological impact while minimizing Coalition losses. "Show me the latest operation reports," Zara requested. The display shifted to show the Arcturus system, where a Coalition strike force had destroyed a Deathworlder fuel depot 3 days earlier. What made the victory particularly significant was that it had been carried out by a joint force of Coalition ships and local resistance fighters, the first time they had successfully coordinated with ground-based rebels. "The resistance cells are getting bolder," Chen noted. "Our success is inspiring them to take bigger risks. Or making them desperate," warned Dr. Webb as he joined the group. The physician had become the Coalition's unofficial expert on refugee psychology and morale. "I'm getting reports from several sectors of resistance groups attempting operations beyond their capabilities. The Helios Prime Cell tried to take on a Deathworlder battle station last week and was completely wiped out. It was the dark side of their success. As word spread of coalition victories, resistance groups throughout occupied space were becoming increasingly aggressive. Many lacked the training, equipment, or coordination to take on heavily defended targets, but their desperation drove them to try anyway. We need to accelerate the Phoenix Protocol, Zara decided. How many coalition operatives do we have trained for insertion missions? 47, replied Lieutenant Commander Transing, a former Imperial Marine who had become the coalition's Special Operations Chief. They're ready for deployment, but once we insert them into occupied territory, we won't be able to extract them if things go wrong. The Phoenix Protocol was perhaps the coalition's most ambitious initiative. Specially trained teams would infiltrate occupied worlds and establish formal links with resistance movements, providing training, equipment, and coordination. It was incredibly dangerous. Captured operatives would face torture and execution, but it was the only way to transform scattered rebel groups into an effective fighting force. The risks are acceptable, Zara decided. Begin Phase 1 insertions. Priority targets are systems with established resistance networks and strategic value. Aye, Admiral. As the meeting broke up and officers returned to their duties, Zara found herself alone with Dr. Webb. The human looked troubled, which had become his default expression since joining the Coalition Command staff. Something bothering you, Doctor? I'm concerned about what we're becoming, he said quietly. 6 months ago, we were refugees focused on survival. Now we're planning military operations that will result in thousands of deaths on both sides. Are we sure this is the right path? It was a question that haunted Zara's dreams. The Empire had been built on principles of peaceful coexistence and diplomatic solutions to conflicts. The Coalition was rapidly becoming everything the Empire had evolved beyond, a military organization that solved problems through violence. The alternative is extinction, she replied. Not just for us, but for every species that doesn't fit the Deathworlder definition of strong enough to survive. They're not just conquering territory, they're reshaping the entire galaxy to match their vision of what life should be. I know the logical arguments, Webb said. But I watch our people training for combat missions, see the way they talk about the enemy, and I wonder if we're becoming the very thing we're fighting against. Before Zara could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. Officers rushed to their stations as red warning lights bathed the room in an ominous glow. Report, Zara commanded. Admiral, we have multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace, Captain Chen announced, her voice tense. Configuration matches Deathworlder heavy cruisers. 27 ships and closing fast. Zara felt her blood turn to ice. Phoenix Base was heavily defended for a hidden facility, but 27 enemy cruisers represented more firepower than their entire defensive fleet. How did they find us? She demanded. Unknown, ma'am. No indication of pursuit from our recent operations, and this system shouldn't appear on any Deathworlder star charts. Time to intercept? 18 minutes at current velocity. 18 minutes to prepare for the battle that would either establish the Coalition as a legitimate threat or destroy them entirely. Zara activated the general alarm and opened communication channels to all Coalition ships. All units, this is Admiral Kextel. We are under attack by superior enemy forces. This is not a drill. All civilian vessels are to begin immediate evacuation procedures. All military vessels are to assume defensive positions according to Plan Gamma. Remember your training, trust in your comrades, and show these bastards what happens when you underestimate the children of a dead empire. As the Coalition fleet scrambled to defensive positions, Zara allowed herself one moment of doubt. Dr. Webb was right. They had become something the old empire would have found horrifying. But perhaps that transformation was exactly what was needed to survive in a galaxy where peace itself was under attack. The Deathworlders were about to learn that even the gentlest species could evolve claws when their survival was threatened. The battle for Phoenix Base lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. When it was over, the Coalition had lost 11 ships and 892 personnel, but 22 Deathworlder heavy cruisers had been reduced to expanding clouds of superheated plasma. Zara stood in the ruined command center, her uniform torn and her secondary arms heavily bandaged, watching damaged control teams work to restore basic systems. Around her, the surviving officers wore expressions of stunned disbelief. They had won, but the cost had been higher than anyone anticipated. "Final casualty reports," she requested. Captain Chin, sporting a head wound that Dr. Webb had hastily bandaged, consulted her damaged tablet. 892 confirmed dead, over 2,000 wounded. The cruiser Determination was completely destroyed with all hands. The steady progress lost main power and artificial gravity but should be reparable. And the enemy? 22 confirmed kills. 5 Deathworlder vessels escaped into hyperspace, including what appeared to be their command ship. The mathematics were stark. The coalition had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, but at a cost that would have been unthinkable during the Empire's peaceful era. In 4 hours, they had lost more personnel than the Imperial Navy had in the previous century of peacekeeping operations. "Admiral," Dr. Webb approached with his medical scanner still in hand. "You need to get that arm looked at properly." Later, Zara was studying the tactical displays, trying to understand how the Deathworlders had found their hidden base. "Lieutenant Velko, any insight into how they located us?" The intelligence chief's normally pristine uniform was smudged with smoke and coolant fluid. "Working on it, ma'am. We've detected traces of exotic radiation that don't match any known hyperspace tracking technology. It's possible they've developed something new. Or someone told them where to find us," suggested Commander Steelclaw as he entered the command center. The Nexri warrior looked relatively unscathed despite having personally led the defense of the station's critical systems. "You suspect a traitor?" "I suspect the Deathworlders are more sophisticated than we've given them credit for. This wasn't a random patrol that stumbled across us, it was a targeted strike designed to cripple our command structure." The implications were chilling. If the Deathworlders could locate their hidden bases at will, the Coalition's entire strategy would need to be revised. They had been counting on mobility and stealth to offset their numerical disadvantage. "Sir," one of the communications technicians called out. "We're receiving a transmission on all frequencies. It's addressed to the terrorist rabble calling itself the Phoenix Coalition." The main holographic display flickered to life, revealing the familiar nightmare visage of War Leader Krothvex. But something was different about the Thanatos collective leader. His usually confident demeanor seemed strained, and there were fresh scars across his armored hide. "Survivors of the failed My Galactic Empire," he began, his voice carrying new undertones of frustration. "You continue to resist the natural order, prolonging suffering for yourselves and others. Your pathetic attacks on our outposts accomplish nothing except to delay the inevitable." The camera pulled back to reveal that Krothvex was standing in what appeared to be a detention facility. Behind him, dozens of figures hung suspended in crystalline containment pods, captured Coalition operatives and resistance fighters. "However, we acknowledge that your persistence has become a minor irritation. Therefore, we offer you this single opportunity for redemption." One of the suspended figures was brought forward, and Zara's heart stopped. It was Commander Elena Vasquez, leader of the Phoenix Protocol insertion team that had been deployed to the Kepler sector 2 weeks earlier. "Surrender unconditionally within 72 standard hours," Krothvex continued, "and we will grant these prisoners a swift execution. Continue your futile resistance, and they will serve as examples of what happens to those who defy the natural order. Their deaths will be educational." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. "They have Elena's team," Dr. Webb said quietly, "and probably intelligence on our entire network." "Sir?" Lieutenant Velko's voice was tense. "I'm detecting massive hyperspace signatures throughout the sector. Multiple fleets, heading for known resistance strongholds." The tactical display lit up with dozens of red contacts. The Deathworlders weren't just threatening the captured operatives. They were launching a coordinated assault on every resistance cell the Phoenix teams had contacted. "It's a trap," Zara realized. They let us insert our operatives, gathered intelligence on the resistance networks, and now they're rolling up the entire underground. Estimated casualties? She asked. Potentially hundreds of thousands, Velko replied. Every major resistance cell in this sector, plus civilian populations they'll classify as collaborators. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Zara was faced with an impossible choice: surrender the coalition to save the captured operatives, or continue fighting while knowing that their operations had inadvertently doomed countless resistance fighters. Admiral, Commander Steelclaw spoke up. There is a third option. I'm listening. My people have been fighting the Deathworlders for over a decade. We've learned that they have one critical weakness: they cannot comprehend the concept of Pyrrhic victory. To them, any action that results in their own casualties for someone else's benefit is fundamentally irrational. Meaning what? Meaning they don't expect us to rescue our people if it puts the larger coalition at risk. The prison facility where they're holding our operatives is a fortress-class installation with minimal strategic value. They're confident we won't attack it because the casualties would be devastating. Zara understood immediately. You're suggesting a rescue mission. More than that. I'm suggesting we turn their trap against them. They want to use our captured people as bait to force our surrender. Instead, we use their confidence against them. Captain Chen looked up from her tactical analysis. The logistics would be nightmare. That facility is in the heart of Deathworlder space, defended by multiple fleets. Which is exactly why they won't expect an attack, Steelclaw replied. And if we time it correctly, we can hit them while their forces are spread out attacking resistance cells. It's suicide, Dr. Webb protested. Even if we could rescue the prisoners, we'd lose most of our remaining fleet in the process. Perhaps, Steelclaw acknowledged. But consider the alternative. If we surrender, the coalition dies and the Deathworlders continue their genocide unopposed. If we do nothing, they execute our people and slaughter the resistance networks anyway. At least this way, we die fighting for something meaningful. Zara looked around the damaged command center at the faces of her officers. They were no longer the desperate refugees who had fled into exile 3 years ago. They had become something harder, more focused, tempered by loss and united by purpose. How long would we need to plan the operation? The prison facility is in the Hades system, Steelclaw replied. With our fastest ships, we could reach it in 36 hours. That gives us 12 hours to plan and execute the rescue before their deadline expires. And if we fail? Then we fail attempting something worthy of the civilization we're trying to preserve. The vote was unanimous. Within 6 hours, every available coalition ship was being loaded with volunteers for what most expected to be a one-way mission. The Phoenix Coalition was about to attempt the most desperate rescue operation in galactic history. As Zara watched the preparations from the observation deck, Dr. Webb joined her one final time. Any regrets? He asked. About what? Choosing to fight instead of accepting extinction? About what we've become. The Empire would have tried diplomacy, looked for a peaceful solution. Zara considered the question seriously. The Empire was a beautiful dream, Doctor. But it was a dream that only worked when everyone agreed to be civilized. The Deathworlders rejected that civilization and chose genocide instead. We can't negotiate with extinction. So we become them? No, Zara said firmly. We become what we need to be to stop them. There's a difference. As the Coalition fleet prepared for hyperspace jump, Zara allowed herself one last look at the damaged but still functional Phoenix base. Whatever happened in the next 48 hours, they had already accomplished something important. They had proven that the so-called soft species could fight back when threatened. The question now was whether that fight would be enough to save the galaxy from a future where only the strongest survived.